309. Don't just let that number pass you by. Stop. Breathe it in. Let it sit in your gut, heavy, like a lead slug. That's 309 heartbeats, snapped like dry twigs in a fraction of a second. 309 men who woke up, laced their boots, drank their bitter coffee, and wrote a final, shaking letter to a girl back in Berlin, only to never see the sun dip below the horizon. It is a whole battalion, a sea of grey uniforms, an entire graveyard, erased from the face of the earth by the steady, rhythmic pulse of a single finger on a trigger. The Nazis had a name for her. They whispered it in the dark of their damp trenches. Lady Death. To the Reich, she wasn't just a soldier. She was a curse. A ghost that lived in the grey mist and the biting frost of the Eastern Front. They tried everything to stop the bleeding. They tried to buy her soul with promises of chocolate and officer ranks over the loudspeakers. Then, when the terror turned to a cold ROT in their stomachs, they screamed that they would tear her into 309 tiny pieces. She just smiled. A cold, hard line in the mud. Because she knew, for the first time since the world broke, they were finally starting to count. But look past the ghost. Look at the hands gripped white around that Mosin-Nagant. They aren't the hands of a butcher. Not yet. They are the hands of a student, a history major, a mother. She didn't hunt for the medals. She didn't hunt for the glory. She hunted because her world was screaming. And the only answer left was a cold piece of lead, delivered with absolute silence. Welcome to the shadows of the unsung.
June 22nd, 1941. The sky over Kiev didn't just turn dark, it screamed. Operation Barbarossa. 3 million boots hitting the Soviet soil all at once. It wasn't a battle. It was an ethnic cleansing masked as a conquest. Lyudmila was 24. She was sitting in a library, surrounded by the dust of ancient history books. She was a scholar, a mother to a young son. She spent her days debating the tactical blunders of the past, never dreaming she was about to become the most terrifying chapter of the future. When the bombs started falling, the line at the recruitment office stretched for miles. The man behind the desk, he was tired. He smelled of stale tobacco and desperation. He looked at Lyudmila. He saw her polished nails, her silk blouse, her calm, academic eyes. He laughed, a dry, rattling sound in his throat. He told her to go to the nursing station. He told her the army needed women to hold hands and change bandages, not to carry a rifle. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. A marksman certificate from the Osoveya-Kim. She told him she had been shooting since she was a girl. She told him she didn't want to heal the wounded. She wanted to stop the men who were causing the wounds. They sent her to the 25th Rifle Division. They didn't give her a hero's welcome. They gave her a uniform that didn't fit, and a bolt-action Mosin-Nagant that felt like a cold piece of firewood in her hands. Then, they sent her to Odessa. Odessa wasn't a postcard. It was a meat grinder. The heat was a physical weight, a thick, humid blanket that smelled of salt, unwashed bodies, and burnt rubber. The mud. God, the mud. It wasn't just dirt. It was a living thing. It swallowed boots. It jammed chambers. It tasted of iron and rot. She lived in a hole, a slit in the earth no wider than a coffin. You want to know what the struggle really looks like?
It's not the charging bayonets, it's the flies. Millions of them, crawling over your eyelids while you try to stay still. It's the thirst that turns your tongue into a piece of dry leather. It's the waiting. For days, she didn't fire a shot. She watched the Germans through her iron sights. She saw them laughing. She saw them sharing cigarettes. They looked like men, and that was the problem. Her finger would ghost over the trigger, and then freeze. The academic in her, the mother in her, it wouldn't let her do it. Then came the day that changed everything. A young soldier, a boy, really, was lying next to her in the brush. He was 19. He had a smile that reminded her of home. A German scout spotted a glint of light. A single shot rang out. The boy didn't even have time to scream. His blood splashed across Lyudmila's face. It was warm. It smelled like pennies. She watched the light go out of his eyes, replaced by a hollow, vacant stare that would haunt her for the next 30 years. The world went silent. The library, the history books, the silk blouses, they all burned away in that second. She wiped the blood from her cheek. She didn't cry. Something inside her, something soft and human, just snapped. She looked through the sights again. She didn't see a man. She didn't see a father or a son. She saw a target, a pest, a thing that needed to be exterminated. She saw 2 Romanian scouts moving through the tall grass about 400 yards out. They were confident, careless. She felt the wood of the stock against her cheek. Cold, hard, real. She slowed her heart rate. Down, down, until the world was nothing but the space between 2 heartbeats. She exhaled halfway and held it. The recoil kicked her shoulder like a mule. The first scout crumpled. He didn't even fall, he just folded. The second scout panicked. He ran for the tree line. He was fast, but he wasn't faster than physics. Crack. 2 shots.
2 bodies. She didn't feel a rush of adrenaline. She didn't feel pride. She felt nothing. A terrifying, hollow void. She realized in that moment that she had crossed a bridge and there was no going back. The girl from the university was dead. The sniper was born. As the weeks turned into months, the tally began. 1, 5, 20. The numbers didn't matter to her, but they mattered to the Reich. They started to realize that death didn't always come with a scream and a charge. Sometimes, death was just a whisper in the wind, a shadow in the grass. By the time the siege of Sevastopol began, the name Lyudmila Pavlichenko was being whispered in the halls of Berlin. And they weren't laughing anymore. They were sending for their best, because the hunter was starting to make them feel like prey. Sevastopol. It wasn't just a city. It was a tomb, carved out of limestone and sea salt. For 250 days, the sun didn't shine over that harbor. It was choked out by a permanent shroud of black smoke and powdered stone. The Germans were throwing everything they had at the gates. Heavy artillery, Stuka dive bombers, enough lead to pave the streets. And in the middle of that meat grinder, Lyudmila was at the height of her powers. But Berlin was tired of the embarrassment. They were tired of their officers being picked off like clay pigeons while they sat in their own trenches. So they sent in the wolves. They pulled their most decorated snipers from the Western Front and the elite training schools. Men who didn't just shoot, they hunted. This was the twist, the moment where the war stopped being about armies and became a chess match played in the dirt. There was one, a German ace. We don't know his name, only his shadow. He had over 200 kills. He was a master of concealment, a man who knew how to use the light, the wind, and the silence as weapons. The duel lasted 3 days. Imagine that. 72 hours. You aren't just a soldier anymore. You are a statue. You crawl out into no man's land at 3 in the morning, dragging your rifle through the sharp rocks until your knees are raw and bleeding. You find a spot, a clump of dead grass, a pile of rubble, and you disappear. The first day was about observation. She lay there, cheek pressed against the cold wood of the Mosin. The limestone dust gets into everything. It's in your throat. It's in your eyes. It's a dry, choking grit that makes you want to cough, but you can't. If you cough, you die. If you shift your weight to ease the cramp in your leg, you die. She watched the Germans' territory. She looked for the wrong shadows. A bird that wouldn't land. A patch of grass that moved against the wind. Nothing. He was good.
He was pure ice.
Day 2. The mental games began. The German was trying to draw her out. He used a dummy, a helmet on a stick, moving it just enough to mimic a careless soldier. Lyudmila didn't bite. She knew that trick. She had used it a dozen times herself. She waited. Her bladder was screaming. Her muscles were knotted like old rope. Her vision was starting to blur from the strain of staring through the glass. But she didn't blink. You have to understand the psychology of the sniper. It's not about the shot. It's about the will. It's about who breaks first, who gets tired, who gets hungry, who lets their mind wander to a warm bed or a hot meal. On the 3rd day, the sun hit a specific angle. Lyudmila saw it, a tiny glint, a microscopic flash of light reflecting off a lens, hidden deep in a pile of bricks 500 yards away. It lasted less than a second, but to her, it was like a flare in the midnight sky. She didn't fire, not yet. She knew he was watching her area just as closely. She needed him to be certain. She took a small piece of cloth, tied it to a wire, and slowly, agonizingly, moved it an inch to the left. The German took the bait. A puff of gray smoke erupted from the bricks. The bullet hissed past her ear, so close she could feel the heat of it. The German, for one fatal heartbeat, thought he had won. He shifted his head just a fraction to see his handiwork. He wanted to see the ghost fall. Lyudmila's finger was already halfway through the pull. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the impact. A clean hit, no mystery, no second chances. She stayed in that hole for another 6 hours, just to be sure. When she finally crawled to his position under the cover of darkness, she found him. He was older than she expected. He had a look of shock frozen on his face. She reached into his pocket and pulled out his logbook. She read the names, the dates, the kills.
He was a hero of the Reich. And now, he was just another body in the Crimean dirt. She didn't feel like a winner. She felt heavy. She took his rifle. She took his book. And she crawled back into the fog. But Sevastopol was dying. The walls were crumbling. During a mortar barrage, a shell landed too close. Shrapnel tore into her side. Her face was shredded. They carried her out on a stretcher, unconscious, as the city fell behind her. They didn't send her back to the front. The Soviet Union realized they had something more valuable than a shooter. They had a symbol. And they were about to send that symbol right into the heart of the lion's den.
They didn't send her back to the mud. They shipped her across the Atlantic to a world that didn't know the smell of burning cities. Washington, D.C. Lyudmila stood in the White House, a girl from the dirt, shaking hands with the most powerful people on earth. But the American press? They were vultures. They didn't ask her about her ballistics. They didn't ask about the windage or the grain of the powder. They asked if she wore makeup in the trenches. They asked if her uniform made her look fat. They treated a woman who had seen the mouth of hell like a sideshow attraction. But Lyudmila had a spine made of Soviet steel. She stood in front of thousands in Chicago. The air was thick with expectation. She looked out at the crowd, men in clean suits, women in silk dresses, and she let the silence hang, heavy, suffocating. She said, "Gentlemen, I am 25 years old, and I have killed 309 fascist invaders by now. Don't you think that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" The room went stone cold. She wasn't just a sniper anymore. She was the conscience of the world. In that circus of fame, she found one real soul: Eleanor Roosevelt. The First Lady and the sniper. Two women from opposite universes, bonded by the weight of a planet on the brink of collapse. Years later, long after the guns fell silent, Eleanor went to Moscow. She pushed past the KGB handlers. She ignored the diplomatic protocols, just to sit on a cramped sofa and drink tea with her old friend. They didn't talk about the kills. They talked about the cost. Lyudmila went back to her books. She became a historian. She spent her days in the quiet of archives. But the war, it never truly let her go. You don't just walk away from 309 ghosts. She suffered from PTSD before they even had a name for it. The night terrors, the crushing weight of the silence. She was a hero, but she was a broken one.
She passed away in 1974, 58 years old. Maybe it was the shrapnel that finally moved to her heart. Or maybe the 309 souls just got too heavy to carry any further. We talk about the unsung because history is written by the victors, but it's bought with the lives of people like Lyudmila. She wasn't a monster. She was a woman who was asked to do the impossible, and she did it until there was nothing left of herself. Next time you look at a photograph of a war, look past the generals. Look for the girl in the grass. Look for the shadow in the mist. She's still out there. 309. Count 'em. And never forget what it took to keep the world from turning dark. Stay sharp. I'll see you in the next one.